Grandma Misim, who was 76 years old at the time, had lost her husband a long time ago. She lived in her house in Banyumas, Central Java. Initially, Grandma Misim lived in this house with her 5 children. Her eldest child was Ratno. At that time, Ratno already had a child named Vivan, who also lived in the house. However, since Ratno had divorced his wife, she no longer lived there. The second child was Samina, who was married and lived in the house with her husband and children. The third child, Yono, was still unmarried at that time. The fourth child was Eddie, and the fifth child was Harry, who was also unmarried. Since all of Grandma Misim's children lived in this house, it was always lively. However, after some time, Grandma Misim's children began to move out. After getting married, Eddie moved to his in-laws' house. Because Eddie was busy with his job and taking care of his family, he only visited Grandma Misim every 2 weeks. Meanwhile, the other siblings still lived with Grandma Misim. Initially, their life was harmonious and peaceful, just like other families. Problems began to arise from Samina, Grandma Misim's second child. Unilaterally, she built her own house on land that still belonged to Grandma Misim, just 5 meters from her house. Samina lived in that house with her 3 children, as her husband had divorced and no longer lived there. The issue arose because none of the family members agreed with Samina's decision to build a house on the family inheritance. They all felt it was unfair since the land should have been divided fairly among her 4 siblings. However, Samina insisted that she was entitled to the land because she felt she had taken care of Grandma Misim the most, while the other children were busy working. The dispute over the land continued to be debated, except for Eddie, who did not see it as a problem since he was content living elsewhere and was busy with his work. Meanwhile, at Grandma Misim's house, this issue dragged on for years, from the time Samina's children were little until they grew up. This family conflict made Samina's children feel frustrated and hurt because their mother was always cornered by her own family. The situation escalated when they saw officials measuring the land over their house, which was suspected to be the work of her 3 siblings who planned to sell the land to the bank without Samina's approval. From this point on, Samina and her children could no longer contain their emotions and planned a very reckless action. In 2014, due to mounting frustration, Samina's 2 children, Irfan and Putra, urged Samina to eliminate their own family members living in Grandma Misim's house. Samina agreed, and they quickly planned their action. Irfan and Putra would act as the executors, preparing a 3-kilogram gas cylinder, a car jack, and a hoe to carry out their plan. Samina's task was to keep watch over Grandma Misim's house, which would be the crime scene, ensuring that no one else or neighbors came by. Additionally, she was responsible for diverting Grandma Misim's attention by inviting her to her own house, so Grandma Misim would not know what was happening. Grandma Misim was not their target. Rather, the targets were Ratno, Yono, and Harry, who were Samina's siblings. Grandma Misim's house was usually quiet from morning until afternoon because all her children were at work. Even Vivan, who still lived in the house, was rarely home during the day due to her studies. This situation was exploited by Samina and her 2 children to carry out their execution. On October 9, 2014, on a Thursday morning, with a well-laid plan, they began their actions. Samina took Grandma Misim to her house without raising any suspicion, and Grandma Misim agreed. After that, Irfan and Putra quickly entered Grandma Misim's house, bringing with them several tools they had prepared. At that time, only Yono was home, getting ready to leave for work. Coincidentally, Yono was in the shower. As soon as Yono finished showering and came out of the bathroom, Irfan and Putra immediately struck him on the head with the 3-kilogram gas cylinder. Yono was instantly knocked back and fell unconscious, eventually taking his last breath. After that, they quickly carried Yono's body to hide it temporarily in Grandma Misim's room. They then waited for the next target to return home. In the late afternoon, Ratno came home. The 2 of them, who had been waiting in the living room, did the same thing. However, Ratno actually fought back, creating a commotion, but in the end, His fate was the same as Yono's. He met his end with a blow from the gas cylinder, which caused him to take his last breath. After that, they hurriedly moved Ratno's body to Grandma Misam's room, piling it on top of Yono's body. Not long after, Harry, Grandma Misam's youngest child, returned home, and he too became their victim that same day. In the late afternoon, they suddenly remembered that Vivian, Ratno's daughter, had not returned from campus. They panicked and thought of how to prevent Vivian from coming home, since she was not their target. Finally, they took Ratno's phone and sent a message to Vivian, telling her not to come home yet. While waiting for a response from Vivian, they rushed to clean up everything in a hurried and panicked manner. However, not long after, Vivian arrived home. They were confused, but since they had no time to think further, they were forced to execute Vivian in the same way, using the 3-kilogram gas cylinder. After that, they cleaned the crime scene, which was covered in bloodstains. Putra and Irfan continued to clean up all the traces they had left in Grandma Misam's house. That night, they buried all 4 victims in the backyard of Grandma Misam's house. No one knew about the process because the surroundings had become quiet, especially at night. Sonia, Samina's daughter, who had just returned from work, was initially uninvolved in this case. She was shocked when her mother, Samina, explained what had happened. Sonia was frightened and reluctant to get involved, but she agreed to keep quiet at her mother's request. On that day, their mission was successful. No one knew or suspected anything. Putra and Irfan were still busy tidying up the victims' belongings in Grandma Misam's house, because they planned to arrange it to make it seem as though the victims had gone to work in another city. Once they finished, all the valuable items belonging to the victims, such as motorcycles, laptops, and other belongings, were gone from Grandma Misam's house. Only then did they allow Grandma Misam to return home. At first, Grandma Misam went about her activities as usual in her empty house. She thought the others were at work, but after several days without anyone returning, Grandma Misam began to feel strange. It was unusual for all her children to be away. Grandma Misam asked Samina, who explained that Yono, Harry, Ratno, and Vivian had gone to Jakarta for work. As a grandmother, Grandma Misam believed her. She felt sad that her children, even her grandchild, had left without saying goodbye. As time passed, their disappearance began to raise questions for some people, especially Vivian's boyfriend. After weeks without news, Vivian's boyfriend started to feel strange, especially since there had been no problems between them. He even came to Grandma Misam's house to look for her, but the house appeared empty. The neighbors and the local residents knew nothing about it. Ratno's co-workers also began searching for him, as Ratno, a civil servant, had not shown up for work for several weeks. Eventually, after several months without any news, Ratno was honorably discharged for failing to report to work. Eddie, Grandma Misam's 4th child who lived outside the city, was also puzzled when he came to the house and found it deserted, with only Grandma Misam and Samina present. Eddie asked Samina about the others' whereabouts. Samina replied as if she didn't know, suggesting they might have gone to Jakarta. Eddie initially had no suspicions, knowing that his relationship with other family members was not good. However, he doubted that everyone would leave at the same time, especially since Vivian was still in college. Eddie decided to confirm by looking for Vivian at her campus and asking her friends, who were also surprised that Vivian had not attended classes for several weeks. From there, Eddie began to feel that something was wrong. Worried, Eddie reported his family's disappearance to the police. The local precinct conducted a search, but found nothing. Even after 5 months had passed, there was still no clarity. Everyone began to resign themselves to the situation and could only hope for the best. 5 years after they went missing in 2014, on August 22, 2019, specifically on a Thursday, Grandma Misam asked a local resident named Rasman for help in creating a drainage system in her backyard and cleaning up the area, as the grass had become overgrown. However, while Rasman was digging to create the drainage, he discovered a bone. Initially, he was not suspicious, thinking it might be an animal bone. But as he dug deeper, he found more bones. What made it even stranger was that he also found fabric that had almost merged with the soil. Upon closer inspection, it appeared to be some kind of clothing. Rasman then realized that the bones resembled those from a burial, but oddly, the grave was very shallow, with a depth of less than 1 meter. Moreover, the presence of clothing indicated that it was a human buried improperly. Because of this, Rasman immediately went to see Grandma Misam to report his discovery. Grandma Misam instructed Rasman to call the neighborhood head. Rasman quickly found the neighborhood head and reported the findings. Eventually, the neighborhood head came to check, and it was indeed something unusual. They promptly reported the discovery to the local police station. Soon after, many police officers arrived at Grandma Misam's backyard to investigate the findings, and curious residents began to gather. The police immediately interrogated 10 witnesses from Grandma Misam's family, including Samina and her 3 children, who were questioned and even interrogated separately. As usual, lies do not last long. During the interrogation, Samina and her 3 children displayed suspicious behavior, and their answers were inconsistent, as if they were hiding something. This is where their lies began to be detected. In short, after a lengthy examination, they had no choice but to confess everything. They admitted to killing Yono, Harry, and Ratno, who had indeed been their targets, as well as Vivan, Ratno's child, whom they also killed. They murdered the victims in Grandma Misam's house. Their motive was to seize inheritance, and also the resentment of Samina's children, as their mother had always been cornered by her own family. Finally, on January 7, 2020, they were tried. Samina, Irfan, and Putra were sentenced to life imprisonment, while Shania, who was deemed not involved in the murders, was sentenced to 4 years in prison for failing to report the case, despite her knowledge, and for assisting in selling the victim's valuable belongings. Hopefully, from cases like this, we can all learn a lesson, especially for those of you who might be experiencing disputes or problems over inheritance with family. Do not let your eyes and hearts be blinded, leading you to make decisions like those in this case. Because once it happens, no matter how deep the regret, it cannot turn back time. Let us not allow our lives to be destroyed just because of inheritance. What do you think about this case? What lessons can be learned? Write your answers in the comments, subscribe, and see you in the next case tomorrow at 9 a.m.